There was a brutal police killing several days ago in relationship to an attempt to prevent the outlandish growth of militarized policing there in Atlanta. And we are very honored to be joined as we continue the show by Kamau Franklin, who's an organizer with Community Movement Builders and also the co-host of the podcast Renegade Culture. Kamau, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate you guys putting me on.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. And, I think a number of people probably have seen something about this, but maybe let's just start with a little context of what is this Cop City and how did it end up in a situation where someone trying to stop it was murdered by police?
So Cop City is basically a militarized police facility that the Atlanta Police Foundation, that the City of Atlanta, that the Atlanta Police themselves proposed after the 2020 uprisings. And this proposal, as they stated themselves, was really meant to be a morale booster for the police. And so they put together basically $60 million worth of corporate funding, $30 million of public funding from the city of Atlanta to build this facility in a forest that we've dubbed as Weelaunee Forest, where they're going to cut down 100 acres of that forest. They're going to actually be leased 300 acres of said forest, but they're going to cut down 100 acres to build this militarized police training center, where they will have over a dozen firing ranges, mock towns and cities, where they will detonate explosive devices, where they will have bars and restaurants and even potentially housing for police. And so this is and a landing pad for a Black Hawk helicopter.
Wow.
So for us, this is something that is a militarized police facility, which is coming out of the 2020 uprisings, which its main two purposes, as far as we can see and are concerned, is to stop future movements and uprisings, as we will probably have soon after this videotape was released of the police killing in Memphis. And two, to continue to criminalize and over-police Black and brown communities as Atlanta gentrifies its way into being basically the next San Francisco.
And of course, there was this person who was killed by police about a week ago who was an activist protesting this. Can you talk about who he was and what happened?
Well, Tortuguita, as he's known to his comrades and friends, was someone who we refer to as a forest defender. And he was one of several forest defenders who, since the city passed this resolution now approximately 9 or 10 months ago, forest defenders have been going into the forest, living in the forest. Some people have been going there periodically and then leaving. People have been doing visits and tours. But basically, it's been acts of civil disobedience to slow down and or stop the city and the private companies from actually tearing down trees and developing Cop City. During most of our protests against Cop City, even prior to there being forest defenders, there has been violence by the police against protesters. Protesters have been arrested, thrown down, pepper sprayed, and so forth and so on. Last year, towards the end of last year, the police, the city, and state officials formed a task force. This task force consists of the Atlanta Police Department, the DeKalb County Police Department, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Homeland Security, where they've decided to criminalize and create a narrative that protesters are criminals. And starting in December, during their raids, they started to charge protesters with domestic terrorism. A law that was brought under Georgia state law that was made a few years ago has never been used before, but now it's being used for the first time against protesters. A week ago, a few days ago, they conducted another raid. And during that raid is when Tortuguita was killed, basically murdered by the police, by a state trooper. We have no other information on that killing except for the narrative that the police have been putting out there, which on its face we understand to be false. The police, although several of these agencies are required to have body cameras on and operating, there's no body cam footage, apparently, what we are told of the actual shooting. We're told that this one protester shot out at over a dozen police officers, one bullet, and then had fire returns, which killed that protester. Information that we've received from people in the neighborhood said they heard a burst of fire. not one shot and then a period of silence and then return to fire, right? Not a one shot, a blip, and then return to fire, but just a burst of fire. So we have no idea how Tortuguita was killed. We don't believe the narrative of the police. As we know, the reason that the uprising started in the very first place was because the police would kill people, particularly black people, and then create a lie and a narrative that only came out to be false after videotape or other eyewitness information or testimony was discovered.
I think that's such a crucially important, element of this as well. I mean, it just seems not credible, quite frankly, that none of these cops would have body cameras. But it also seems that the narrative, both about the allegations against Tortuguita, and then also from the protest, that this is being used to double down on militarized policing. I mean, I've seen some people are being charged with domestic terrorism. I think for just quote unquote property damage, and the way one cop car being burned is being described. I mean, it really feels that the police are trying to not just shut down the opposition to Cop City, but really sort of double down on their broader narrative about why such a facility, quote unquote, is needed.
Most definitely. We see this facility, and through their own documents that we've gotten through Freedom of Information Acts, it shows that this facility is going to be used not only to train at so-called Atlanta police on military tactics and crowd control and the rest of it, but that this facility is going to train 43% of the people that this facility is going to train is going to be officers from out of state. So the police from out of state are going to come to this facility to train. We already know that Georgia has an ongoing program called Gilly with the Israeli Police Department in which they exchange training. So just picture Israeli police officers are training Georgia police officers on the tactics they use against Palestinians, and Georgia police officers are giving training to Israeli police officers on the tactics they use against black people here. So this confluence of militarized policing is not just a Atlanta problem. This is something in terms of this center which is going to hook up the Atlanta with national and international ramifications, and it's why we know that Cop City can't be built.
That's a really good point you raise about the sort of international nature of this. And we know that Israeli police have a lot of exchange programs with U.S. police departments, but specifically with the Georgia police departments. There's like a special sort of pipeline there. And of course, that includes police of other countries as well that end up coming and training with various police departments and back and forth and teaching each other horrendous tactics. But, this also speaks to a broader issue, which is the fact that this year, but 2022, police killings in 2022 reached a record high in the U.S. Law enforcement in the U.S. killed at least 1,176 people that year, which is the deadliest for police violence as far as it's been, being recorded. So it raises a lot of questions because so much happened back in 2020, right, over the killing of George Floyd. I mean, you had some of the largest protests in U.S. history all across the country, people coming out, learning about police violence, protesting racist police violence. Yet nothing seems to have changed. It's quite the opposite. Now you have this Democratic Party that's in charge that, actually used it to its advantage during those George Floyd protests to try to make it something against Trump. But now that they're in power, they've done nothing to address this. Instead, they've actually just finger wagged at the idea of defund the police.
In fact, they've done the exact opposite, right? The State of the Union address, Joe Biden got up and said, don't defund, fund the police. And that was met with a standing ovation from both the Republicans and the Democrats. So we completely understand here in Atlanta, it is the city Democrats, right? The city government, which is led by so-called moderate liberal black Democrats, which is now teamed up with the state government of the right-wing conservative Kemp to call for the criminalization of protesters, which is also banded together with the federal government led by the Democrats, right? It is the FBI through the Justice Department and Homeland Security, which is working in this task force to criminalize protesters, to call protesters outside agitators, to use the language that I like to say, the language of Southern segregationists. Both Democrats and Republicans are using that language to talk about protesters. So we know this is not just a party affiliation. This is really about the fact that establishment politicians, Democrat and Republican, all support policing because policing does two things. It protects the private property of corporations and developers, and it suppresses marginalized communities, particular Black communities, and in jails us in the prison industrial complex.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's honestly the mirror image of the two sides says so much about the nature of the system that we're in, and you know how deeply rooted so much of this is. And I guess I wonder, in terms of moving forward, you know, where things will go, or what organizers there are doing on the ground in Atlanta, because obviously, you know, this is a huge issue around police terrorism in this country.
I mean, I think organizers will not be intimidated. Organizers are still gathering. We're still strategizing. People are still planning. I think it's been said about this movement, there's autonomy of ideas, perspectives, and actions. And so as far as I see and as far as I know, organizers will not be threatened out of existence. There are still marches, demonstrations, town halls, other things that are going to be planned which are going to continue to challenge the idea that this cop city, this thing that no one asked for in Atlanta. I should stress that during the time of the vote, over 70% of the people who called in and said they did not want this cop city happening. 90% of the people who live in that community through various surveys have said they do not want this facility to happen. A community that is 70% Black and brown, that is working class, that was promised this forest, Weelaunee Forest, as an area of recreation, an area that has a park attached to it, an area that has creeks, that will have hiking trails. That was all supposed to be for the folks who are neighboring that community. But now they've decided to renege on that and instead to cut down over 100 acres of forest to turn it into a playground for the police.
Wow. I mean, I guess it's maybe not shocking, but it's certainly outrageous and it's certainly unbelievable. Before we let you go real quick, Kamau, anywhere people should be looking for more information or a place they can go to support?
There's a website called stopcopcity.com. People can go on that, or stopcopcity.org. They can go there. Community movement builders. You can check out social media. There's a bunch of things that will be put up around continued activity and organizing on this issue. And that, you know, obviously we can share here. We'll share on Black Power Media. So we are definitely going to keep getting the word out about this, what's happening with this facility and how folks can fight back against it.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Well, Kamau Franklin, as always, happy to have you here. Organizer with Community Movement Builders, co-host of the podcast Renegade Culture. Shout out to Kalanji Changa. Also, Black Power Media. Everything y'all are doing is fantastic. Really appreciate you giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate y'all.